Good evening. I'm Alan Jackson. Welcome to Nashville. During the campaign, the right to an abortion got a lot of attention, but in the end, voters chose not to reward Kamala Harris for the stance that she put out so many times, that it's your body and your choice. That's always been the case, and of course, Donald Trump wasn't trying to take that choice away. What was not included in all the campaigning is what a lot of women of all ages already know. The choice is not just have the baby or don't have the baby, because there are so many other options. Options that are not just best for the child, but for the mother, the father, the siblings, all the family members involved. With us tonight is a man who has taken this on directly. He's the president and CEO of CareNet, and he has a new book out called The Alternative to Abortion: Why We Must Be Pro-Abundant Life. Roland Warren, welcome to our new program.
Well, thank you very much. Great to be with you, Pastor.
Well, I love the title, Pro-Abundant Life. There are so many options for bringing the baby to term other than abortion, but to this day, it seems those options rarely make it onto the air, even during a political campaign. Why
Yes.
is that?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the issue has been framed primarily through a political lens. And it's interesting. I'll tell you this little factoid, which a lot of people don't know. Kamala Harris's sister actually had an unplanned pregnancy when she was 17, and went on to go to, I guess, Berkeley, I think it was, and then went on to graduate from Stanford Law School, all as a single mother. And it was just interesting to me during the campaign that when they talked about alternatives to abortion, that here was a story that was sitting right there in her own family. And she didn't even use that story to give someone the hope, because part of the narrative is that, a woman can't have her dreams, can't accomplish her dreams and with a child. And her sister did exactly the very thing that we talk about at Karen, and frankly, the very thing that I experienced in my own life. And so I think a lot of it has to do with that. It's framed that way. It's not framed through the lens of God's design for family, God's call to discipleship, all the kinds of things that I talk about in the book. And I think when you frame it that way, then the solutions become very binary, as opposed to from a discipleship perspective, which gives you a lot more things to talk about and a lot more things for the church in particular to be involved in.
Well, I want to believe that we're at a turning point where a certain segment of the country tried to turn the Dobbs decision that replaced Roe v. Wade as an attempt just to eliminate abortion. Even while there's no truth to that, the Democrats ran on creating fear that women would have no control over their pregnancy if Donald Trump were to win. Listen to how Kamala Harris put it during the election.
He's not done. He would ban abortion nationwide. He would restrict access to birth control, put IVF treatments at risk, and force states to monitor women's pregnancies.
As we've said, it didn't work. But to what extent do you blame the pro-life advocates for not having pushed back more on that rather obvious lie?
Well, I mean, certainly through a political lens, I mean, everything that she said wasn't true. I mean, the fact of the matter is that, frankly, President-elect Trump is not for, a national ban on abortion. And frankly, he's even said that he's not really going to work actively to restrict the abortion pill, which is now 63% of abortion. So, I mean, it was political rhetoric that actually was not based in fact. But I think the biggest thing here, from my standpoint, is to kind of take the issue and look at it through a different lens. And that's kind of what my book's about, why we should be pro-abundant life. And certainly as believers, there's a difference between being pro-abundant life and being pro-life. Because candidly, the term pro-life today, I'm not really even sure what that means. I mean, some folks say they're pro-life and they're for a 15-week ban, which is basically 96% of abortions, or a 20-week ban, which is basically 99% of abortions are okay. Or they can say, from a biblical perspective, that I'm pro-life from the perspective that I believe the child is created in the image of God, Imago Dei, and therefore, whether you're conceived in lust or love, or rather, it doesn't really matter, because you're still creating the image of God and are deserving of life. That whole range of things is now considered pro-life. And so I'm kind of pushing back against that narrative and saying, no, we must be pro-abundant life, which is based on John 10:10, where Christ said, I came that you might have life and then have that life abundantly. And when you think about through that lens, that doesn't change based on the political season, because your response to abortion is based on Jesus's why statement, why he came, that we might have life and have life abundantly. And that's what I unpack in the book, this whole difference between being pro-life and being pro-abundant life, a political narrative, which is what pro-life has become, as opposed to a pro-abundant life perspective, which is anchored in Jesus' why statement.
Well, I think your book is very helpful for helping people think through some of these issues. You know, I frequently say that the fundamental problem we have is not political, it's spiritual. And on this
Yes.
abortion issue, I think that is front and center when Christians are asking politicians to solve a problem that really isn't a political problem. We're the
I think
agents
that's so
to be
true.
advocates for life in our culture.
No, I think that's absolutely true. And I think one of the big mistakes, candidly, is that we exchange the pulpit for a podium. I mean, this issue has to be led from the pulpit. And we decided in this movement, I think, that we were going to lead it from the podium, that we were going to try to win this battle. Basically, I tell people often, with Saul's armor and Caesar's weapons. David didn't do that. He took what God gave him, right? So what he was leading with was what? The pulpit, not the podium. And the reason why we're not having the success that we need to have around this issue is because we've done that. So that's why I really try to move back to pastors have to lead on this issue, because it is primarily a moral issue, a biblical issue, a spiritual issue, and it's frankly a John 10:10 issue in terms of a life perspective that links God's design for family, God's call to discipleship in a very, very specific way. And that's a narrative that only the Church of Jesus Christ has, which is why pastors have to lead, and that we as if you will, following our pastors, have to respond in a way that's pro-abundant life.
Well, I know you've found that there are plenty of places in the Bible where you can find pro-abundant life messages. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Oh, absolutely. You know, one of the things that really inspired me to change my perspective on this or look at this differently was the birth of Christ. Now, here you have Jesus coming into the world, right? Essentially in a situation where Mary was faced with an unplanned pregnancy from a human perspective. And what did God do? Well, he came to Mary, gave her that news that she would bear and conceive and bear a child, rather. And she faced the same dilemma as any woman facing a pregnancy decision, hope and aspirations for her life that did not include a child at that time and in that way. And what does she do in that moment? She says, what? Let it be unto me as you have said. And she chooses life. Well, any woman, whether she's at a Planned Parenthood or a pregnancy center or wherever, is faced with that same dilemma. And so the ministry work of all this is really trying to encourage this woman to tap into her inner Mary. So you actually find the abortion issue in the birth of Christ, but there's more. What did God do to make sure that Mary's unplanned pregnancy wasn't a crisis pregnancy? He didn't give her a pregnancy center. He gave her a husband. In other words, he told Joseph to be a husband to her and a father to the child growing inside of her. So from a pro-abundant life perspective, what you're seeing is that God created a family. This unplanned pregnancy that Mary faced was to what end? That she would become a disciple of Jesus Christ, that Joseph would become a disciple of Jesus Christ, that you and I would become a disciple of Jesus Christ. And so when you start to frame the issue that way, you realize, no, this is a pulpit issue, not a podium issue. It's a pulpit issue because only the pulpit has that nativity narrative that's reflected in the first chapter, the first book of the New Testament. So that's the first piece of it when you start to think about that. And then you go beyond that, which is God's call to discipleship. So many Christians today think about the life issue primarily through a political engagement perspective or material support. But it's not primarily either one of those things. It's primarily a discipleship issue because every good work that Christians do should lead to discipleship. Jesus did good works to what end? To make disciples for himself. And so we as Christians should be looking at the life issue the same way we do with so many other issues. Water for the thirsty, food for the hungry, clothes for the naked. We don't outsource those to the political process. We say, no, those are on-ramps to discipleship. And this is why, from my standpoint, in this moment, we need to be pulling this issue back to the church. The church has to lead, and we have to stop expecting politicians to lead on, to your point, an issue that's primarily a moral issue about God's design for family and God's call to discipleship. And Pastor, you folks are the leaders of that perspective. Only the Church of Jesus Christ leads on that perspective.
Well, your message is so important. You know, we've got to set aside a little bit of the pretentiousness. Christian families aren't perfect. And if we will allow God into the midst of our brokenness, he writes a better future for us. Even Jesus had a borrowed dad.
Absolutely.
We're going to take a short break now. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back with more from Roland Warren. He's the president and CEO of CareNet in just a moment. We're back now with the president and CEO of CareNet, Roland Warren. You said that when women find out that they're pregnant, the first person they talk to is the father. 60% said the father, which is more than doctors, abortion providers, mothers, or friends. Why is that?
It's funny. I mean, it's a story that I lived myself. I mean, part of what I talk about in the book is being an undergrad at Princeton my junior year and getting my girlfriend pregnant. She was a sophomore, and we faced an unplanned pregnancy. By God's grace, we ended up having the baby, and she ended up graduating from Princeton and then going on to medical school and becoming a doctor. But I remember that very well because for the first 5 months, there was only one other person who knew she was pregnant other than her, and it was me. And so I actually lived that. It's like the old Hair Club for Men commercial. I'm not just the president, I'm also a client. I saw firsthand the impact that the father has on the decision. And to your point, he is the most influential person in the decision. And that's really why a pro-abundant life perspective is so important. Why? Because what you saw God do is he put Joseph into that unplanned pregnancy. We have to do more to put a guy into the unplanned pregnancy. 87% of the women who have abortions are unmarried. And so what you see reflected in the abortion issue is the sanctity of marriage and family and the sanctity of life. And when Joseph got the news, the first thing he was told was, do not be afraid to take Mary as your what? Baby mama? No, wife, right? And so what you see is an affirmation of the sanctity of marriage and family even before the sanctity of life. And so we've delinked those things as we looked at the issue, and candidly, it's one of the reasons why we have the issues that we have.
You've also said that pregnant women are all too often afraid to bring up their pregnancy, especially those that are outside of a marriage for fear of being wrongly judged. Is it true that too many people are judgmental when it comes to these situations? You've lived through this one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think a lot of times, and particularly in the church context, we have to remember how Jesus treated the woman caught in adultery, right? He said, "What? Neither do I condemn you, but go and sin no more." And too often, frankly, the response in Christian families has been, no, we're going to stone her. Well, here's the thing. You can't stone the woman without stoning the baby. We have to treat her the way that Jesus treated her. We can't stone her with condemnation. What we're supposed to do is treat her the way Jesus said, "Neither did I condemn you, but go and sin no more." And when you start to think about this issue in a pro-abundant life way, that it's about God's design for family and God's call to discipleship, you see this unplanned pregnancy through the same lens that, you should look at Mary's unplanned pregnancy from a human perspective. It was an opportunity for her to become a disciple of Jesus Christ. And this unplanned pregnancy was how God created that moment. Well, this woman facing an unplanned pregnancy, whether it's in your family, in your church, wherever she may be, your first thought should not be, who do I need to vote for so she can't have an abortion, or what kind of material support she needs. Your first thought should be, she needs to become a disciple of Jesus Christ. The child growing inside of her becomes a disciple of Jesus Christ. And when you think about it that way, sanctity of life is not just on one Sunday in January. It's sanctity of life every day, because every day we're called to do what? To help people live out the great commandment, to fulfill the great commission. That's only the work of the church. And that's why this issue has to be led by the church.
You are out preaching the pastor. Good job. So what are some of the barriers to people finding more about these alternatives to abortion? Because there really are some good options.
Well, yeah, certainly. You can come to care-net.org to see what you can do there. And we also have an amazing ministry model called Making Life Disciples. You can go to makinglifedisciples.com. That's a ministry component that we developed specifically to help small groups in the church come alongside women who are facing pregnancy decisions. So from conception to birth, whether she's at a pregnancy center or whether she's in a church. Here's the other thing, Pastor. The abortion rate in the church is about as high as it is in the culture. There are people sitting in the pews that are in the pews on Sunday and in the abortion clinic on Monday. But you got to ask yourself, if a woman's facing a pregnancy decision, she takes a pregnancy test on Sunday morning, it's positive, but to her the news is negative, who's she supposed to talk to in your church? Is there a ministry on-ramp in your church so that you look more like a compassionate alternative than Planned Parenthood does? And so we really need to be thinking about this issue through a discipleship perspective so that we've got a ministry on-ramp to do that. And that's what Making Life Disciples is about, to help small groups in the church come alongside someone facing a pregnancy decision inside or outside the church. And this is the training that you need in order to do that. So I do encourage folks to visit makinglifedisciples.com to learn more about that, because it really is a way that we're called to see this issue through the lens of a discipleship. It's primarily a discipleship issue of the church, And I tell you, when we start doing that, the gates of hell that abortion represents will not prevail against the Church of Jesus Christ.
Amen. Well, Roland Warren, thank you for joining us today, and especially for your new book, The Alternative to Abortion, Why We Must Be Pro-Abundant Life. We will help spread the word.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, in a moment, I'll have some thoughts of my own that should help. Before Isaiah was ever known as a prophet, certainly was one of the major prophets, he was a young man. He had a vision of the throne room of God that changed his life. There's a verse from that I want to share with you. It's Isaiah 6 and verse 8. He said, I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send? And who will go for us? And I said, here am I, send me. Well, I want to make a suggestion that as Christ followers, you and I have been nominated for an assignment. You see, I think we've imagined that our goal is to get saved, to be born again, to experience an introduction into the kingdom of God, and then wait for eternity. I don't understand that to be the assignment at all. I believe that when God calls us into His kingdom, that He calls us for a purpose, just as certainly as He called Isaiah. Now, you and I probably aren't called to be prophets, and certainly probably aren't called to be prophets in the courts of kings or great leaders, but we have a kingdom assignment. You see, I've said many times, and I'll keep repeating it, I don't believe elections are going to fix our society because I don't believe our primary problems are political. I believe they're spiritual. In fact, we've been in this place before, the administration that's headed back to Washington, and I'm grateful they are, but they've been to Washington before. And when the end of their term came, the changes they initiated didn't seem to last 6 weeks. They were undone. Again, the fundamental problem in society is spiritual. So you and I, as people of faith, need to understand that unless there's a heart change broadly in the American people, whatever changes are initiated aren't going to be able to be maintained. So we have to be different. We're watching a whole group of people head back to D.C., changing their lives, reorienting their schedules, and we're looking forward to the changes that they're initiated. Let's you and I, as Christ followers, allow God to reorder our lives. Not look through the windows and point at others, but say, God, we're willing to be different. We will follow you. If we'll do that, there's more reasons for hope than despair. And we return, I'm going to read some of your emails. Thank you for taking the time to share your emails with us. Your thoughts and perspectives are important to all of us on the program. Sarita wrote, do you believe generational curses can be broken? I appreciate your time. Thank you, and God bless you. Absolutely. In fact, I think the church would be far more effective if we would come back to some of these fundamental biblical principles that blessings and curses are real. They're not hocus pocus. They're not the stuff of Disney or simply scary movies, that there are spiritual forces that shape our lives. The good news of our faith is that through the cross, Jesus provided a permanent, total, absolute, irreversible defeat to Satan and his entire kingdom. So through the authority of Jesus' name and the power of His shed blood, every curse can be broken over our lives. But we need an authority beyond our own strength of will or force of character. We need the authority of Jesus' name. And with that, any person can be free. Finally, Ruth from Apple Valley, California, I watch your ministries on TBN early in the morning to help me get in touch with the Lord. And your evening show helps me put what's happening during the day and on the news in perspective. The information I receive is so very helpful. God bless you. Well, Ruth, I appreciate your perspective. Somebody told me this weekend when they couldn't sleep, they'd put one of my sermons on and they would drift off to sleep almost immediately. There's many ways we can help in your life. Well, if you haven't yet, take a moment to send your email to comments@alanjacksonnow.com. Your feedback and questions, they do so much to shape this show. I'm Alan Jackson. You have a wonderful evening.